it is true. Grief does not end. There is no timeline for it. There's no set prescription for it. How it works, it's different in everyone. But I think what but that becomes a mantra for people to allow themselves to sink deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm sure that my friend who dropped out of college was not like, "Sweet, I'm dropping out of college. This is wonderful." No, she like had every intention to go back, but then was just wallowing in the sadness for so long that it was no longer processing. It became just wallowing in self flagellation and become self punishment, right? So we have to be careful as we go through our grief work, um, to make sure that we're doing it productively.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. Today we have Dave Grammer with us, who's going to be sharing a little bit of his life story as well as his own journey with grief. So, Dave, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
I'm so excited you're here. Now, let's just start with like a few like getting to know you kind of questions. And actually, Dave and I have
Sure.
never met. I've only met your wife over the phone, by the way. I've never met your wife in person, even that, which is hilarious. Well, that I've like been friends with Roz for a while and I've never even met
Hmm.
her in person. So that is just the world, right? Of
Yeah,
nowadays.
the
We know
digital universe.
it is, yeah, and we know each other through common friends and stuff. So,
Hmm.
so anyway, so yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Um, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the Los Angeles area. I've been in LA for about 15 years. My wife and I've been married for 10. We have two children. One is 6, and the baby is a year and a half, and a chaotic dog. It,
I know we were just talking about
oh,
our puppies.
energy
How
upon
old is
energy
she?
upon energy.
Yeah.
She's actually a month younger than the baby, so
Oh.
she's still a puppy. He's a baby. The 6-year-old has boundless energy, and instead of tiring each other out, they feed into each other. So it's just tornado upon tornado.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that makes it fun and interesting for sure. I'm sure. What time do you go to bed? Like at the end of the day, like is it like, oh, let's go to bed, or do you guys normally want
No,
some like quiet time?
I need quiet time. So my wife works pretty early in the morning, so she goes to bed shortly after the boys do, but I tend to stay up a lot later just because I need that quiet time to myself that doesn't exist during the day. So,
Right. And yeah, and now with the situation, because at this moment when we're interviewing, all kids
hmm
in LA area are still virtual learners
hmm
due to COVID. So you've been able to juggle leading
oh,
your work
oh,
life and the kids.
able is a strong word.
Okay,
Um,
how about hanging in there?
hanging in there's better, yeah, because our 6-year-old just started kindergarten this year. And so he's been trying to learn what that means. What is kindergarten? What does school look like? He's been in preschool, but it's a bit different, the expectations and the standards. Um, so he's been learning that while also we signed him up prior to all of the COVID stuff. We signed him up for a dual immersion program to learn Mandarin Chinese. So he's
Wow.
trying to learn Chinese distance. It's a like so. There's a lot of struggle with that. But we got the dog a week before the shutdown, and the whole sales pitch to my wife was that Chase will be going to school. It'll be me and the baby. Me and Connor got this. I can take the dog. I can train her. We'll do long walks. It'll be great. And a week later, everything shut down, and Chase was home. The dog was home, and there was no training or anything. And so it's been a little up in the air. I typically see clients in the evenings when my wife gets home, so that has been able to continue. But it's been, like every parent that's working from home or trying to, it's been challenging to do the administrative stuff. Um,
Right. No,
you know,
that's tricky. And
redoing
then
my
do you notice?
website, that kind of stuff is all just what it is.
Yeah, because you're the one that's home with them, and
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
basically and with a 6-year-old, it's not like you could just let him sit and do his thing.
No,
You got to kind of be there, make sure that the Zoom or whatever
right.
way that you're connecting is working. Now, how do you when you see clients, do you normally see adults, children, everything in between?
So my the window I shoot for is 14 to about 40, 45.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Typically male. I've really kind of found my niche as working with men and teenage boys who are struggling with masculinity issues and trying to figure out how to be themselves within kind of the really twisted view of what masculinity should be that our society projects.
Mm. So that's a lot of your focus. That's so
Hmm.
interesting. What you're saying is actually so funny because I had a friend whose son knits, and
Hmm.
he's 12, and he looks at her as like, "Mom, do you think I'm the only straight kid that knits?" Like kind of like like things
Yeah.
like as easy as like something
Hmm.
like that, like and them kind of choosing. My son would always
Well,
say, they say that it's like that we're sexist against women, but it's like, how come boys can't wear pink or not?
hmm
Like, you know.
it's it's really tough because it really does go both ways. However, from male to female is so much, I don't want to say worse, but
Yeah.
more physically effective, if you will. Like it stops women from getting jobs that they deserve. It stops women from being paid the same amount that they should be paid. They don't get listened to, these kinds of things. So like I don't want to equate the social elements as the same. Like, oh, men have it just as hard as women. Like, no. Like,
Mhm, mhm.
let's acknowledge that being a white male, middle-aged
White
male is
privilege.
kind of
Yeah.
that's a win, in a
Mhm,
terrible way. And so we definitely want to acknowledge that there's a major difference there that needs to be rectified. But in terms of the emotional expectations, it is, women get these horrible messages all day long, magazines, movies, TV shows, radio, everything about look, be thinner, be beautiful, don't be smart, don't do, you can't do this, do that. But they're told constantly how to be. And what is
mhm,
not often recognized is that men get a lot of those types of messages just as frequently that are equally detrimental. I mean, when was the last time you saw a positive, strong, courageous, yet emotional and uh, male lead that cried, that was not
mhm,
gay?
mhm, mhm.
Right? They don't exist on TV. The male archetype is literally superheroes, literally
Mhm.
inhumans. Thor is a god. He is literally a god. Like that's what we're supposed to be. Men are expected to just take all of this emotional trauma and difficulty, swallow it, and move forward. And the only things we can really show are joy and anger. And so a lot of the work I do is helping men find the gray area between starting to develop a lot more emotional vocabulary. A lot of boys are not taught to say, I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm lonely. They just are told, stop crying and move on. And so
Boys
this,
don't cry. Boys don't cry.
no,
Like, what are you doing? Don't cry. Yeah, like,
I'm,
yeah, they're just
I'm
shake it
40.
off.
I'm
Shake it off.
40 and I've been working on myself since my mom put my first stint in therapy was when I was 8. So I've got
Mm,
32 years on and off of working in therapy. I still have to fight myself to allow myself to cry in a movie. Like,
mm,
because I'm
mm,
just the innate things just stop. No, don't cry, don't cry. Like that kind of stuff is just there. So there's a lot of this going on a daily basis. And so men who are effeminate or maybe not physically strong, these kinds of things, or don't have a way that the society views as tough, like your friend's son who knits. There's nothing wrong with that. He should be able to knit and feel comfortable with that. It's art. He's being artistic. That's his medium. And we kind of forget that for a long time, the top designers, the top upholsterers, these people who do sewing and knitting and things have been all men.
mhm.
Like, so
Absolutely.
it's this weird thing of like, you can't do that as a boy, but if you can make millions of dollars doing it, by all means, do what you want. How does
Yeah,
that
same
work?
thing go yeah, same goes with, like, barbers even before. Barbers were
Yeah.
and they were straight, they used to be straight men, right? And now
Hmm.
it's that, or they still are a lot, but it's still that notion, right?
Yeah, the
Yeah, it's
stereotype.
persona, it's stereotypes that create.
Yeah.
Now, in that, like, how knowing that
Hmm.
aspect of it, how has it shifted? And we're as I told Dave, I'm like, we're just gonna be chatting. We'll see when we get to the actual reason of why we got. But all these things are so important because they all actually fit into the aspect of
Yeah,
even grieving too, right?
absolutely. Hmm.
So how do you parent then different these two young boys you're raising, being aware now of these aspects of stereotypes, knowing that for you it took you,
Hmm.
so it still, as you said, is something you still have to work through to be able to allow all these emotions. How is it different
Yeah.
for you as a parent?
So I think the thing for me that I got from my mom, because my mom had a really difficult childhood, and well, both of my parents did. I think my mom's had a lot of trauma in it though, um,
Mhm,
and so she started doing her own therapy work around the time that I was 8 or 9 when she started with me, putting me in therapy around the same time she went in. Um, Really, she kind of got us all in therapy at the same time. Um, but watching that transition from her starting to try and help me learn the emotional vocabulary, and then
mhm.
going through grad school and learning a lot about psychology and therapy and emotions and things. And so the thing for me that I'm really focusing on is trying to help my 6 year old develop that emotional vocabulary. So instead of just when he throws a tantrum or gets really angry, you know, helping him understand that anger comes after another emotion. No one is just
Yes.
angry. That doesn't
That's
work
just
that way.
the tip of the yeah, that's just the what you could see
It's
over the
yeah.
iceberg. It's the tip of the iceberg, the
Well,
bottom, right? What is below is
yeah.
sadness, hurt,
Yes.
frustration, other
Yes.
emotions. Mhm.
And so trying to, with kids, young kids, I don't really work with too young, but with young kids, it's about providing that language to them and asking questions like, okay, do you know why you're so angry? And if they don't, or they can't verbalize it, then starting to provide that. Saying like, oh, are you hurt that I took your toy away? Are you
Mhm.
sad that you don't get to play with that Lego right now? Are you upset that just providing a lot of these? Are you embarrassed that your friend called you a name? Like trying to
Mhm.
give those words so they can go, oh. And there's times when he says, oh, what does that mean? All right, well, being embarrassed is when you feel like guilty or shame, or like he says something and you feel really bad about this toy that you really loved, but your friend made fun of it, and now you're like, ugh, like, and that's embarrassing. He's, oh yeah, that. Okay, great. Now you have
That's
a
good. Now
word,
that's
you
awesome.
know, because so often this language is not taught. I mean, I worked in residential treatment facilities for teenagers with mental health, but mainly with substance problems like, meth, heroin, alcohol, these
Mhm.
kinds of things. Kids would come and stay with us for 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. And so many of them had no concept of emotional vocabulary. Like, they're just like, I'm angry. I'm like, I know you're angry, but what else is going on? And literally had to provide them with a list of words. Like, here's a
Wow.
sheet in your paperwork. Here's a list of emotion words that you can choose from. And they would go through and be like, well, what does that one mean? What does that one mean? And you have to describe it to a 16-year-old. You go, that's terrible. We shouldn't have to do this. And it's not
Mm.
just kids in rehab. This is like, I run into this in my private practice now where like kids are like, I don't know what I'm feeling. All right, well, can you describe it? And trying to
Yeah.
describe it and picking out the words that match the best through that. So it's right now, being that he's 6 and the younger one is 1.5 and not really talking yet. We spend a lot of time on emotional, vocabulary,
Mhm.
and then, starting the process of figuring out how to talk through things. So he screams and yells and gets upset and runs in his room. Okay, give him a few minutes, and trying to teach him ways to manage those. So like if he's too upset, if he's starting to build up to a tantrum, I can say to him like, hey, it seems like I'm starting to get upset, you're starting to get upset. Should we take a little break? Do you want to go in your room for 5 minutes to try and cool down? Go give him some space in his room, go in and talk to him in a few minutes and see if that helps. It doesn't always help, and we're not always perfect at it. Just because I can teach
Right,
other
right.
people to do it doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely,
um,
absolutely. Yeah,
but it's the
I feel
process.
it's even harder, right, when it's your own
Hmm.
children. I used to feel that way when I worked with kids before, and before I had kids. And I was
Mhm.
so good at it too. I could tell
Oh
them what to
man.
do, like in a way that was just nice. I wouldn't say the word don't. I wouldn't say the word no. It was like, "Oh, keep the balls in the ball pit," instead of saying, "Don't throw them out," like, it's like,
Uh
"Up the stairs, down the slide," while they were going up the slide, instead,
huh.
like, things like that. Then, of course, I have my kids, and it's like, "No, no, 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 don't,"
What are you
I think
doing?
yeah, yeah. It's
What's
that
wrong with
emotional
you?
yeah, it's that
Ugh.
emotional attachment, of course, to the outcome
Yeah,
of our own
of course.
kids that makes it so much harder.
Yeah.
Now with emotional vocabulary and then emotional intelligence, are those then linked?
Um,
Are those like vocabulary is like kind of just having the words and emotional intelligence is just knowing how to navigate our emotions through it, or what's
I
the
mean,
difference between those 2
I
concepts?
think emotional vocabulary is having the words to identify how you're feeling.
Mhm.
Okay, emotional intelligence, I think, is a bit broader. It is knowing what you're feeling, knowing how to respond to your feelings. So, like the idea that if I know that I'm starting to get depressed and I feel
Mhm.
myself going down over the last week of like, the gray, and I hate gray, rainy weather, and that's why I live in sunny Southern California, but it's been gray and drizzly
And
this last week,
you
and
did
I'm
grow
like,
up
this is,
there though. You grew up in Didn't you grow up in Oregon?
no, I
Did
grew
you
up in
grow
New
up in Oregon?
York.
Oh, New York. I don't know
Yeah.
why I thought Oregon because of another friend we have in common that I
Hmm.
know that knows your mom, and I thought for
Yeah.
some reason that it had been from Oregon or something like
No,
that. Oh,
no,
and
that's
not
just
New York.
from moving back to LA. So I was born in
Ah,
California,
got
but
it.
moved to New York at a young age and
Okay.
lived in New York for 20 years, and that's why I live here now.
Okay. So now
Just
you
'cause-
moved to the sun, you're staying in the sun.
yes.
That's like so okay, so then emotional
So
intelligence then is
so
knowing
it's
uh-huh.
knowing that I'm going down and saying,
Mhm.
I'm starting to feel my energy go down. I'm starting to feel more depressed. I'm having less patience with my kids. um, it's about being able to recognize that and then take the steps necessary to mitigate the depression. Going, okay,
Mhm.
I know that I need to start to eat more healthy. Like I got to cut out the sugar because that's a big thing that takes me down further. I can't stay up so late at night. I have to make sure I'm getting exercise. These kinds of things. It's having the plan and knowing yourself well enough, and then
Mhm.
eventually you start to be able to recognize that with other people and utilize that intelligence to in your interactions with others. Of like, I had a boss that he had a cycle, man. The first day of the month, first week of the month, he was the sweetest, nicest, most wonderful boss ever. The second week, he was tired. The third week, he was angry. And the fourth week, he was hunting for a fight. And
Wow.
so you start like having this emotional intelligence allowed me to recognize very quickly. Don't ever ask him for a day off in a last minute in the last week. Don't ask him for anything.
He'll
Just be
fire you.
helpful.
You're like, yeah,
Yeah.
he'll
Well,
fire you that if you ask him on that week because
yeah.
he's already in
And
the
it was
bad
Yeah, and so like this is television where screaming and yelling and cursing at each other is very commonplace. And so the fourth week of the month, every time there was he was in 3 or 4 screaming matches with different coworkers and employees. And
mood.
I'm looking at these people going, "Are you dumb or do you like the fight? Like, what is the miss here?" And to me, looking back on it now, I look and I go, they didn't have the emotional intelligence to recognize his cycle and say, this dude is like, he has no effective outlet for his anger. So he just bottles it up. And then the fourth week, he can't keep it in anymore. And so it blows off. He blows his top. He screams at whoever's in front of him, and then he's got it done. And so that next week he's wonderful. That's when you go and ask for a raise. That's when you ask for a week off, or a day off in 2 days. That's what you like. You kind of start to figure this stuff out. Like it's a little silly, but at the same time is
So
really
helpful. That's so
this
helpful.
dude.
Yeah.
This dude never yelled at me. I worked for him for 6 years. He never yelled at me.
Well, that's because you
Everybody else
didn't
in the
show up.
office
Yeah,
got yelled at.
because you didn't talk to him that week four,
Yeah.
3 and
Or
4.
if I did talk to him, I was like, "Hey, George, how can I help you? What do you
Mm,
need? I got you." And he'd
that's
be like,
so
do this. I'm like, got you, man. I'll take that for you. Thank you. No problem. Like, I got a few minutes. You need something, like just trying to be helpful.
yeah.
Cause I was like, this dude's going to blow his top at anybody and everybody. And I'm just
Mm,
trying to be helpful. So it was just an interesting thing, but it's this emotional intelligence. Like that's a very work related thing. But I mean, think about a spouse. Like, if you don't know how to read your husband's emotional state, it's going to lead to so many more fights.
mhm.
and arguments and discussions and issues, or it will allow problems to continue. Like we have to learn if we want these relationships to progress, whether it's friendships, you know, uh, romantic relationships, familial relationships. Like we have to be able to read these signs and cues and figure out to some degree where somebody else is. Now, I don't think we should be mind readers, but having an idea of like, oh, something's wrong, and I should go into the bedroom and ask her how she's doing instead of turning on the PlayStation, and spending the next 4 hours out here. That
Mhm.
would be a bad idea. Let me go talk to her because yes, I want to play the game, but talking to her and solving the problem will probably make the next week and a half much easier for both of us.
Right.
It
Yeah.
solves her, can help solve her problems, all that kind of stuff. So this
And
is where the
prevent, yeah.
intelligence comes in.
And it prevents also, and not only solve the person's problems, but at the end of the day, make it just more pleasant
Yeah.
for everybody else. Now, the that aspect of also being aware is it's not only the emotional intelligence, but is being aware of just of our surroundings. That's something I
Mhm.
tell my kid all the time. I'm like, if you walk into
Mhm.
the kitchen and I'm cooking, don't just say what's for dinner. I'm like, it is one of those triggers, right, for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, you walk in and you say, how can I help? Like that's as
Yeah.
easy as it, because that makes you know that you're aware of what's going around you instead of just like what's for the
Mhm.
so like if you walk in and you could start washing the dishes right away, or doing like there's certain things you have to start just doing on your own, like being one step ahead before you're asked to do something, and it's by being
Yeah.
aware of your surroundings, and by doing that it's also just being aware of people's emotions and stuff. That's so
Mhm.
helpful. Thank you. I
Mhm.
I like that explanation and the difference between the two. I had never thought of it implying the emotional intelligence of knowing how to relate to others too. Like I don't know why I just thought
Yeah.
it had to do with just expressing our own emotions. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. My
All right.
pleasure.
So now let's dive then. We spoke a little about your mom.
Mhm.
Um, and so let's talk then about your mom and what happened and
Sure.
her and so forth. So we're gonna go
So
back now.
I'm just going to preface this by saying that I'm terrible with times and dates, so I honestly have no idea how long it was. Like I know she passed in January of 2009, and I think she was diagnosed with breast cancer maybe a year before that, a year and a half. I'm really not sure.
You're not
Um,
the only person. There's so many people that when I ask, there's some that it's like they know to the T and that dates, but then there's others that it's like, I don't really know. Like it
wow,
becomes this blur. So you're
this
not
is
the first
well,
person
it's
that yeah.
I wish it was just in this area, but it's not. It's in everything. Like if it's not in the last 6 weeks, it could be sometime in the last 10 years. I don't know. So unless there's big markers, like right now, I'm like, okay, cool. I got pre-COVID, I got post-COVID. All right, so I know when it was this year. All right, you
PC
know.
and BC. Yeah,
Did I
PC
have
and BC.
did I have a child at the time that happened? No. Okay, so then it was
Yeah, yeah,
before
yeah.
2000. That's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are the
anyway.
things. Was I married? Was I not? Yeah, like
Yeah,
that. You weren't
my
married then because you've been married for 10, right? You
yeah.
said or
Well,
12. Yeah.
so we had met. I met my wife about a week and a half before my mom passed,
Oh,
maybe two
wow.
weeks before. So we met right before she passed.
Okay.
Um, so it was, but yeah, she was diagnosed, and I mean, it was kind of like, it was weird. Like I wasn't super freaked out about it when she was diagnosed because a couple of things. One, she was always kind of, I don't want to say frail, but
Mhm,
frail,
mhm,
and not physically strong. Her immune system was not very strong. She got sick pretty regularly. Um, like she would slip and fall, and she would break her, like she broke her arm, like things like that. Like and it wasn't like a big fall.
mhm,
So it was like her body was just not physically very strong. Um, in that sense, her personality was incredibly strong, but the body was not. So I mean, I'd been used to her having a weird diet from the time as long as I can remember. She was making two dinners, one for my brother and I, and one for her. Um, just like because she was eating like boiled chicken and brown rice, and that was
mhm.
about it. Like for as long as that kind of dietary restriction thing for a long time. So it it was like okay. but it was also like breast cancer. I'm like, this is not terrible. Like, if there's one you got to get, that's the one that's kind of treatable. So okay,
Mhm.
cool. Um, and she seemed to get better after, a bunch of the radiation treatments and stuff really helped. But she was also diagnosed at stage 4. Um,
Okay.
it was already in the bones, and they found it because she couldn't walk real well, and because it was in her hips and was stopping her hip joint from moving properly. Um, so she was never able to take chemo. She did one dose of chemo, and it took her out for 6 weeks. And she was like, "I'm not. That's not happening." So they just kind of did radiation for a while, and then um, it was kind of in the middle. It wasn't really like the first couple of months after the radiation started, when the tumors were reduced in her hips and she could walk again. It was really great, but after a couple of months, it kind of went back down to this middle area. And she wasn't very mobile for most of the last year. Um, and then my dad, my brother, and I traveled to Florida. We did a conference. My dad was performing and asked if, well, I guess they asked him and my brother if they would perform, and he had wanted to do a performance about men. So my dad asked if he, my brother, and I could do this performance um, at the conference, which we did. It was great. Um, and that was where I met my wife. Then I came back. It was because my dad had to go travel somewhere, so he couldn't be home with my mom. So I went and stayed with her for like 5 or 6 days. And there was a series of people that were coming and staying with her to, friends that would fly out and help, or that were local that would come and stay with her for a couple of days because she couldn't get around real well. Um, but that last week that I was there was she was detaching, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so she was sleeping all night and then kind of dozing all day on the couch. And we didn't really, it really was a very weird situation because I didn't feel like I was visiting my mom.
Mhm. Mhm.
We weren't talking very much. Like we were watching, the TV was on, and I was texting with this new girl I'd just met,
Mhm.
um, kind of thing. So it was a very strange thing. And then I went home. Somebody else came to stay with her, and I went home. And the next day, she was rushed to the hospital because she couldn't breathe. And she was in intensive care for about 4 or 5 days, and then they moved her to palliative care for, I don't know, 36 to 48 hours, and then she passed.
Mhm.
Um,
Were
so
you there? Were you there when she passed?
yeah, yeah, because I only lived about an hour and a half from them, so I drove up. My dad was flying in from somewhere else, and my brother was doing a gig in Czechoslovakia, so he had to pull some emergency international travel um, to get
Mhm.
back.
Wow.
But we were all able to be there. There was a bunch of we got a couple of friends there, and had some people drive up from LA to visit and stuff. So it was nice. Everybody kind of got an opportunity to say goodbye, and kind of chat with her and talk with her a bit, which was really cool. Um, and then she passed in the middle of the night one night.
Was was your mom into music are you into music as well? Like your
I mean, yes,
brother and
like
dad, are you musicians? Like,
yeah, not as professionally as my dad and brother
yeah,
are, but
but you are.
yeah, I play music, and I sing, more for myself and the kids than anything else.
Oh,
Um,
so was there singing, like, at her side? Like, was that something that helped you
uh,
guys or not? Or prayers? Like, what
Not
helped you
really.
guys when she was sick, or what would help her during that
So
time when she was, sick? Just company, sitting? What were
yeah,
the ways in which you connected with her during that time?
she was a talker. So my dad is music. My dad and brother, the music is their language for everything. Like
Mhm.
if they have a big issue they need to work through, they write songs about it. And my mom helped my dad write a number of his songs early on.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, she co-wrote all of his music for the first 3 or 4 albums, I think.
Oh,
Um,
I grew up
yeah,
listening and marching along my house, and stuff, singing your
yeah.
dad's songs, so
So they co-wrote a bunch of music together, but I think she was always more on the lyric side, and he did the music to it, and she would edit, give her opinions, but she didn't listen to a lot of music. Like when she was in the car driving, unless I turned the radio on, it was silence, and we would talk, but there was no noise. She wouldn't, she listened to some talk radio, but a lot of it was more talking and trying to just sort things out. So there were a lot of, by the time she died, there were a number of young women from LA that she was kind of mentoring. And so they were
Hmm.
kind of coming up to see her, and she was giving some last information, some last guidance, that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of that going on, um,
Was she
but
a
a lot of
coach?
fun.
Was she kind of like you in terms of that aspect? I mean, you are an LMFT. Was she into counseling, or was she more a life coach, intuitive what was
So
her
she
take?
described herself as a shaman. I
Oh,
don't
beautiful.
really, I don't really
Okay.
know what that means. In all
Okay.
honesty,
Mhm.
um, I did not. I was not really open to whatever she was doing, um,
Mhm.
in a weird way. But the young women in LA that worked with her, like, were regularly coming back from visiting her, having their minds blown. She did go to get a master's degree as a shaman. Apparently, it was available somewhere.
Mhm.
And I'm not entirely. I don't know if she ever finished or not. I think she did. I don't know. She got close. I don't think she did. I think she got close, and then something stopped it. Um, but she was much more intuitive and kind of emotional, spiritual healing, but
Mm.
um, not in the therapy sense, or in a clinical psychology kind of mindset. Much
Not
more
in the
of
books,
a
not in the books kind of sense, but just the
right.
yeah, the soul
Yeah, yeah,
soul
yeah.
soul to soul.
Yeah, soul
So
healing.
yeah, soul healing, which is interesting, right? Being that she was herself so frail and going through her own
Hmm.
things, yet she was still able to still keep giving to others,
Yeah. Well,
all of this.
I think to me that was one of the big lessons that I took from her and her kind of whole passing, was this idea of that it doesn't matter how hard things are. Like, I really do believe that the hardest parts of her life were when she was a child. And
Mhm,
so, as terrible as that was, I don't know the full details of that. I'm not sure I want to, but the idea of, like, just understanding. I've worked with plenty of kids who've been in those types of situations, and as difficult and as awful as those experiences are, the silver lining to that is that nothing scares you.
mm,
Right? Once you've
mhm,
been through the worst, like,
mhm,
if you really put your mind to it and you decide to grow and change and go through all whatever transformation needs to happen, nothing's going to scare you after that. Like, you've been
mm,
through the hardest thing you'll ever do. So building a business, that's easy.
mm,
you know, like, this kind of thing is so in that sense, um it becomes there there's a strength that comes from going through these really difficult challenges. And
mhm,
I don't believe anyone is really challenged beyond their capacity. So to me, that says that anyone who's going through a difficult situation, or something, not that they deserve it necessarily, but that they are capable of working through it in some way. Uh, and that allows for a really positive outlook on whatever someone's dealing with.
mm. Now, how was that then for you? Was her death the first major grief experience in terms of death
No,
that you had lived? No, what other
no.
death
So
experiences had you experienced?
I had a couple of friends pass away in high school.
Mm,
And then my best friend from high school passed away when I was 20 in college. And so the friends were close, but not like super close. So it was upsetting and, like, oh my God, but not like
your
real
best friend,
terrible. Yeah.
but then your
Like, there
best
were
friend
people
is
I
in
knew.
your
Yeah.
yeah.
There were people I knew. I'd hung out with them. I'd spent time with them. And I knew people who were really close with them that were sad. And it was like, all right, cool. This is sad. Whatever. Yeah, I can deal with it. And then my best friend passed away. He overdosed
Mm,
at 19,
mm,
and that one was really hard. But my mom kind of, I don't want to say she pushed me through it, but her philosophy, and I agree with it 100%, and have used it for my life, and have recommended to all my patients and clients and stuff, is the idea that she wouldn't let me stop my life. So I reached out to some teachers. I went home from college the day after I found out, um, and was home for a day or two. Went back up to school for a couple of days. Went back to class, and then went home again for the funeral. and then went back to class. Like she would not let me come home and stay home for a week or 2 weeks or whatever. Um, she was not going to allow that, and I'm kind of grateful for that because I'm definitely the person that getting started is the hardest part. Once I'm going, I can power through pretty much anything. So like I had been doing school, I was in school and was really rolling with that, and to have that stopped. I have a friend of mine in from high school. Her father passed away when she was in college, and she went home and was like, "I'm going to take a semester off," and never went back.
Oh,
Like
wow. Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so I think my mom was really scared of that and pushed me through it. And so that has been my kind of mantra, is that when these awful things happen, you can't stop. Like, yes, you need to stop and grieve. You need to have your moments. I mean, I think I took a week off of work, um, because we organized from, well, maybe it was a week and a half, I'm not sure. But she passed, and we're in the Baha'i faith, and in the Baha'i faith, you're supposed to, when someone passes, they need to be buried, um, as quickly as possible. There's no embalming, there's no wake. You got to get it done and taken care of as quickly as you can. And so from the time she passed to the time she was buried was like 36 hours.
Hmm.
And then we did a memorial, I think, a week later. Or no, yeah, I don't. Yeah, it must have been a week later because we had people fly out. Um, so we did. So there was a memorial about a week later. But outside of that, like after my mom was buried, I went back to work.
Hmm.
Like I was like, I'm not gonna sit and I'm gonna be depressed. I'm gonna be sad. I'm gonna cry a lot, but I'm not gonna let my life stop, because it doesn't, whether you want it to or
Yeah.
not. I
Yeah,
also,
right, the Earth still spin right?
yeah,
We're still spinning, yeah,
and
so it's not like it stops, yeah.
I was in grad school. She passed away 3 days before the spring semester started for grad school. So like I contacted some friends and was like, hey, can you're in this class with me? Can you tell the teacher what happened? I'll be there when in the next couple of days. And everyone was really understanding. All the teachers like take as much time as you need, but I couldn't let myself do that. And really, it actually was the lifetiming is perfect. And I don't believe in coincidences like this. I think the universe set it up in
Mhm,
that way, or God set it up in that way. That one of the classes that I was taking was my group therapy class,
mm.
and the way that class was structured was the first hour and a half of the class was lecture, and then we'd take a 5 or 10 minute break. Then the second half of that class was a group, like we would do a process group.
So you'd actually get to share your emotions
Yeah,
in that? Mhm,
yeah. Well, and so the very first day that I was back was the first day she was doing the group process, and so we kind of sat there for about 5 minutes, everybody staring at each other because no one wanted to go first. And then the teacher turned to me and was like, "Do you want to share?" And I was like, I mean, yes, I can share, but it's gonna go. We're going down a hole right now. Like this is
mm,
not a. Oh, I'm sad that this happened. Like this is, and it ended up being really great because one, I got group therapy every week for a semester, but two, like starting off with that allowed, like the next week, a woman in the class talked about how she was scared that her husband was cheating on her, and the next
mm.
week it just kept it.
It opened up the door for others to be
Yeah,
able to share theirs,
everybody
yeah,
was like, okay, okay, we can go deep, sure.
yeah.
And they, because I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, and I'm a, I'm an open book. Like, there's never a person who, you have to be really unemotionally intelligent to not know that I'm upset about something. Like, I'm not capable of hiding it.
You wear your emotions on your sleeve, as they say.
Oh,
Now, were you able to express? Like, you were talking about crying and things like that before, like, you're like, "I don't cry at I'm learning how to cry
yeah,
even in movies." How were you able to cry, as part of your grief? Was that
yeah,
part of your
yeah.
okay.
I mean, I think in the group, it was so fresh, I wasn't able to stop it because like the first group was literally a week or so after she had passed. Like, so it wasn't like I couldn't stop it if I wanted to. Um, but most of the crying did happen like at home and toward, in the middle of the night, like typically when I was alone, um, and not really around people.
Mhm,
Some of Now at the time I was living with um, some friends of mine, and the wife was a very close was one of the women who had been going to see my mom, and
mhm.
so there was some sharing of the grief there, but it's still different. losing a mentor versus losing a parent is a bit of a difference in intensity, I think. Um, but it was nice in the sense that the
You could
people
talk
there
about
were,
her. Yeah, that you could
yeah,
talk about her and they knew and they could talk
yeah,
share memories and things like that about her.
yeah, and there was a lot of understanding. It wasn't, there weren't. I had a number of people around me who were open to the conversation, and were not like, oh, okay, dude, whatever. I mean, like, you going back to the male, masculinity thing. Like,
Mhm.
there's nothing more terrifying for men than another man like crying, not tearing up and being like, I'm just like, man, it's hard, but like really crying. Dude, men have no idea how to handle that. We don't,
You're not yeah,
we
it's
don't
like
have
it's
to. We don't ever have to. Like, that never is a thing. And
right,
so
so true.
the only time you have to deal with someone really blubbering at you is when your wife is upset. And even then, guys are like,
You
oh,
don't know what to
she's
do,
crying.
yeah.
What do I do? Let me get a tissue and chocolate. Does that help? I don't know. Like, it's this. I mean, I'm being a bit stereotypical myself right now, but I feel like this is what we're being set up for,
So
and
true.
it's important to be able to support our friends, male and female, when we're really upset and crying and having these awful moments. Um, and it's interesting because, like, I just kind of realized this myself, but I'm a therapist. Like, my job is to let people come and cry to me. But when I have
Mhm.
a friend who's dealing with trauma or dealing with a big loss, I'm the guy who comes in and makes them laugh.
Mm. So
I can't. It's
humor
for
is your
me.
go-to.
For
Mhm.
me, it's yeah, and the closer the loss is to me, the more inappropriate the humor gets.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
that's really
I'm with
crossed a
you,
lot of
I'm the
lines right
same.
now.
No, you know
Like, I
what
had a
though? That's something so important it's so important that you're sharing that because it's so true. Yeah,
yeah,
we all kinda deal with grief differently. I'm humor as well, so I get
and
it.
but it's like, it's one of those things. It's just interesting because I'm like, all right, so like my job is to tolerate people crying and being upset, and yet when it's a friend or a family member, I really want to make them laugh, and I
Mhm.
have to really, really try hard not to do that with my children. Like,
Mm.
that has been a real challenge for me, is when he's really upset and crying about something, whether a toy broke, or he got in a fight with a friend, or he got in trouble about something and he's really crying hard. Like, I have to, like, I'm constantly stopping myself from saying, don't cry, this is nothing to cry about. What are you're upset, your Lego, dude, we'll put the Lego back together, it fell on the floor and broke, like, come on. And I have to catch myself in those moments and be like, no, cry, be upset. It is okay to be upset. You are allowed to be sad that you put a lot of effort into this and it fell and broke. And now
Mhm.
you're sad. Yes, we can fix it, but that's not the issue right now. You're sad about the effort.
Yes. Yes.
And so trying to recognize that, and curtail that, because, like, as adults, one of my friends lost her daughter a couple of months ago, and
Mm.
it was a grown adult daughter, but still, she was like 25 or 26. And I called, and I wasn't sure if she was going to answer the phone, and I was like, yeah, whether she does, great. If she doesn't, I'll leave a voicemail, it's fine. She answered, and she said, you're one of the few people I answer because I know you're going to make me laugh. I was like, cool, I know what we're doing, let's do it.
Mhm.
And we had a great conversation. We talked for like 30 minutes, and she laughed a lot. And I was like, all right, great, I got a lot of things to complain about in a really silly, over the top way, so let's go. Like,
Mhm. That's what she needed. She at
it's
that
what she
moment, that's
needed.
what she needed,
Yeah.
right. And that's I think that that's the key is knowing what does the person need if in that moment for their
Mhm.
grief, like and again, going back to the emotional intelligence as you were saying,
Mhm.
and actually asking like, what would make you feel better right now a little bit or what would you like for me to
Yeah.
do? Would you like because sometimes it's just being there, that's enough. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's making laugh, sometimes it's just not talking at all, whatever it is.
Right.
Sometimes it's doing things for them,
Mhm.
or things, it's just the different ways that we can be. But the aspect where you were talking about the trying to feeling uncomfortable with tears and the not knowing what
Mhm.
to do. I remember even just when you were talking even in relationships, my husband, like whenever I'd have like really like tough moments and like I'd just be crying and sometimes I wouldn't even know why I was crying. I just felt like crying, right? And so
Mhm.
he'd be trying to like make it better. What did I do? What can I do? And I'm like, no, listen, I just want to cry. Like,
Yeah.
just let me. be right now how I am. I don't want you to try to fix it. I don't
Hmm.
need any fixing. I just need to have this emotional, release at this moment. That's all. So, of course, after 17 years of marriage now, we got that
Sure,
clear already. So
sure.
so so that is important too, of the person that is going through the grief, of being open enough to share what it is they need, if they just want to
Well, I think,
cry, if they want,
yeah,
so yeah.
I think one of the things I've taught the men that I work with that are struggling with emotional intelligence and understanding their spouse or their girlfriend or whatever is, or partner really, is this idea of asking. If you can't tell, ask. you know
Mm,
like, and I did that with my wife early on, where there were times I'm like, because you know one of the differences between men and women is that men naturally, on top of all the stereotypical stuff and the emotional, the cultural information that's being pushed into us, we are more Mr. Fix It mentality. Here's a
yeah.
problem, fix it, move on. Here's a problem, fix it, move on. And that's not always what people want. So if you're not, so I always have said to them, like, if you're not sure what your wife wants or what your partner wants, ask. You can always say, like, hey, I can see that you're upset or you're frustrated. Do you want me to try and help you fix this, or would you prefer I just sit
Yes.
here and listen? I can do both.
Yes.
And then as you go through that and they go, I need you to just listen, like, and some of it's obvious. When my wife comes home and complains about her work, I can't fix that. That's an
Mhm.
obvious, easy solution for me. Cool, I can just listen and I can be supportive and I can be helpful, and I can, challenge her in ways that will help her identify how she needs to fix it, whatever that means for her. Um, but like, because there are times when she's just, I just need you to take this over and do it. Okay,
Mhm. Mhm.
I can do that.
That's even helped me even in my communication with friends. Sometimes when they're
Hmm.
sharing something with me, I say, "Okay, do you want me to listen, or do you want to just kind of vent, or do you need
Right.
any feedback? Do you want my opinion?" Or, and actually I've had to learn to ask, "Do you want my opinion?" Because I am one of those that just start saying in general my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
So I've had to kind of learn that not necessarily is everybody wanting my opinion or wanting me to fix it. They just really just sometimes want to vent. So I've had to
Hmm.
learn to ask that question, even in conversations with friends. So
And
that's
I've
that's
learned
really helpful.
the flip side of that, though, is to learn who to talk to, because
Oh.
I know for me, there are certain people that if I am not in the mood for feedback, I cannot call them to talk about the issue because they're going to give it to me.
Mm,
And it's valuable,
mm,
and like, it's good. It's not a knock on them in any way. They're just going to call me out in ways that I need to be called out. But if I'm not ready for that, I'm not calling them. I'm not
mm.
calling that dude.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When I'm ready for it, then I'm like, all right, here we go. I
I
don't know
need
what
the
he's going to
lecture.
say,
I need the
but I need it.
lecture. I need, yeah. Yeah. Uh,
I'm ready for it. Here we go. And then
I'm
we
ready
call
to
and we
do the
talk,
work.
and he's like, "Well, are you ready now?" And like, we trying to joke about it. He's like, "You ready now? Okay, cool, let's do this." you know, but it's both sides, right? I need to know what they're looking for, but I
Yeah.
also need to know what I'm looking for,
Uh-huh.
because nobody has, you know we don't have three or four people that are everything to us, or at least we shouldn't, in my opinion. It takes a
I
village to raise a
agree.
kid. It takes a village to be a living, functioning, reasonable adult. And so, knowing, I have friends that I talk about video games with. I have friends that I talk about martial arts with. I have friends that I talk about, family stuff with. I have friends that I talk about the big issues of the world with. And like, knowing, what do I need? What is going to feed me right now? I just need a break. I've been too stressed. I need to talk about stupid video
All the
games and
video games.
make stupid jokes. I'm calling JP. If I'm like, no, I'm struggling with big world issues and we need to figure this, like, I need to figure some stuff out. I'm going to call my dude who's going to give me the feedback. Like,
Yeah.
and knowing this stuff, I like, I've been using this analogy a lot lately, but I really like it. Um, is that, there's research lately that has been coming out that is showing that boys specifically, I don't know about girls, but the research is focusing on boys, as young as 14 are starting to sever their friendships with other boys.
Hmm.
And you can see a distinct change in how they talk about their best friends, how they talk about wanting to see their best friends, how they talk about wanting to spend time with them from 11 and 12 and 14 and on. And basically what happens is men, as they go from teenagehood into manhood, start paring away their friends, and they cut down until it's just a spouse is like the only friend, maybe two or three male friends, but they're like that's about it, and it's not enough of a social structure. Um, and so the analogy I really love is Lord of the Rings. Um, the first book is the Fellowship of the Ring, and at the end of the first book, they basically decide this one character is not going to make it to go throw the ring in the fire and destroy
By
the thing,
himself.
and
He needs his friends. Yeah.
yeah, like he can't do it alone, so he
Mm,
gets 9 dudes to go with him,
mhm,
and they're all good at something. This dude's a good fighter. This dude's really smart. This, and they struggle. They're not all successful, right? So at least one of them dies, and they kind of splinter, and then they come back together, and then they splinter again, and they're all doing different things, but they support each other throughout that whole process,
mm,
right? And that is a much better metaphor for me of what needs to happen and how people need to be supporting themselves. Not just men,
mm,
like people need this. The only reason I'm focusing on men with it is because I think culturally women are allowed to be supportive and be supported by their peers
mhm.
far more than men are.
So
Uh,
true. Yeah.
so
That is
so
no.
this kind of building this up in this group together that's like, all right, I need help. Who can I call? And all right, well, this is what we got to do. I have a buddy in New York whose basement just flooded out, and he's calling in the troops. And luckily for him, people are showing up. And he's like, all right, this dude's bringing me a couple of pumps. This guy's good at waterproofing, so he's going to go and waterproof the basement and help him figure out what he needs to buy and do these things. Yeah, this guy does that. Da, da, da. And so this village is coming together to support him because it happened, I think, like Christmas Eve. His basement,
Oh,
they came
wow.
downstairs to get presents, and the basement had
Oh,
2 feet of water.
man.
Like, so what do? You just put out the feelers and be like, hey, can anybody help me? And see who shows up. It's not going to be everybody, but developing that community to allow for that is so crucial.
Something else too is the aspect of being able to know how to ask for help and when to ask, because that's the thing. A
Hmm.
lot of times too, going back again to the archetype, as you were saying before,
Right.
am I saying it that correct? Right. It's like,
Hmm.
I know how to, I don't need a map. I'm going to go I know how to get there. I don't need help.
Hmm.
Right. And that goes also in in several personalities, that I
Sure.
even remember my mom even telling me that I don't even ask, like, she never would help me. I had this conversation before she passed away. Like, she would never, like, help me, like, just, but she's like, "You never asked me, Kendra. You've always been so independent. Like, you never
Right.
asked."
Yeah.
So I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, I never asked." I always just thought being the oldest of 4, I would just always be the one that would just do it on my own because there were other ones that needed the help
Hmm.
in my home, you know? So,
Hmm.
so that's important there too. Yeah, because if not,
Yeah.
like this friend of yours, if he was just swallowing his pride, like if he was like prideful about
Yeah.
asking for help, he'd have his basement flooded and not, not reaching
Well,
out for the troops.
and he'd end up paying $5,000 or $6,000 out to some emergency
Mhm.
plumber to call them out on Christmas to come pump his basement, and he's still stuck trying to. Then he's got to figure out how to do all this stuff to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again. But instead,
Right.
but he was able to reach out and be like, hey. I mean, he kind of did it in a quote unquote manly way. He posted on Facebook and let people offer,
That's awesome
but
still, but that's
still,
so great. That's
it's
so great.
still
Yeah.
it's still a way of asking for it, right? Like it's still a
Yes.
way of saying I need help here. Obviously,
Mhm.
it would be better if you were able to directly go. You know what? I know John's got a pump. I know Bill's got a pump. I'm going to give them a call.
Mhm.
I know Billy. He waterproofs houses, so he knows what to do. Maybe he'll go like bring some materials over. We can start making sure this doesn't happen again. Like he wasn't able to be that direct about it, but he still was able to put it out there into the universe and be like, I need help.
Right. No, that's
uh,
so good. Now let's go back, just before, because we've jumped everywhere and it's amazing
hmm
because it's all interconnected again. Then the asking for help and the grief component again, back to your
hmm
mom. You went back then to school, and then that was one of your tools then, was your own class, your own group
Yeah,
classes, or you were
yeah.
going to school, helped you in your grief journey. What
hmm
other tools did you use, Dave?
So What I did was very quickly I found a so um, shortly after my mom passed, I moved into my own apartment out of the house. I was kind of staying in a back house kind of area, and I moved into this apartment that was um, in between where I worked and where I went to school. It was like 5 minutes north was work, 5 minutes south was school. And once I got in there, it was kind of alone. I realized that I was going down, and I needed to kind of
Mhm.
stop myself from going too deep. And so I ended up finding a therapist that was, in the office complex, that the office building I was in. So I ended up started seeing a therapist within a couple of weeks um, of her passing, shortly after,
Mhm.
and that was very helpful just in terms of just getting it out, like processing it, being able to, therapy's always been a sacred, safe space for me. And I'm like, all right, cool. I know this person's not supposed to judge me. And even if they are judging me, they can't let me know. So that's fine. If it's, as long as I don't know about it, I don't care. Um, so it's kind of, that was a very beneficial space.
How was it with your relationship then too? Because you had just started then dating. You had just met
Yeah,
Roz, and so then also, how was it then starting a new relationship as you're in the middle? Like, how she got to know you was when you were in one of your most vulnerable
yeah.
moments in life. So
Well,
how was that dynamic as well? And it was
it
long
was,
distance for a while, right?
yeah, yeah. It was long distance up until we got married.
Mhm,
Um, so we were long distance for about a year and a half. And so, which I think was actually very beneficial. It's I I have a trouble with small talk
mhm,
on a day to day basis. Like when she comes home from work, I'm like, I don't care who you had lunch with. I don't care about the joke they said. None of that matters to me.
mhm,
Um, but if you want to talk about how you're struggling with your boss or with a coworker is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or this person's not doing their job and is making your job harder, like that's real world stuff. Like we can talk about that. If you want to talk about the state of the world, we can talk about that. Like I need deep, meaningful conversations. I can't do foo foo. And then I went and over here, and then I did this, and then I don't need a schedule. Um,
we do that, but that's
yeah,
what we do.
I don't
That's
need that.
what we do. I don't
Get it
I'm
over
like
with.
Roz, I'm like, I went here and then I did A, B,
Yeah.
C, D, E, at
Well,
2 o'clock, I went and
but that's and the thing is to me, I'm like that's fluff. That's to stop us from talking about the real issues.
the deeper stuff. Yeah, yeah.
So that's on it. Like when I'm in front of someone, I can't tolerate it. So on the phone, it's even worse. So it forced us to have very real, meaningful conversations. So we talked about stuff with my mom. Her mom has had cancer as well. It was a different experience, and so it was very interesting because she was struggling on some level to get my experience because we never, there were no rushes to the hospital outside of the last time. So,
Mhm,
like, I called Roz as I was driving up to the hospital, and one of the first questions she asked was like, "Oh, well, is this like the other times?" And I'm like, "What other times?"
mm,
And she was like, "Oh, well, like with my mom, we went to the hospital like 4 or 5 times with her before, and her mom's still going strong." And
mhm,
so I was like, "Oh, no, we never. That's never happened before. There's never
mm,
been a before time. This is the only time she's gone to the hospital, which to me was a blessing. Like I'm not a fan of being in and out of hospitals and all of that stuff. Like, nah, let's get it done and be out of here. I don't. uh,
mhm,
so it was a very interesting experience in that sense. And it just I think made it deepened the conversations because there was more meaningful conversation about my mom,
mhm,
about death, about this kind of stuff, which is, you know, one of the big tenets too that I have always held is uh, death is not scary to me. I'm not concerned. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid for other people. Um, as I mentioned, I'm a Baha'i, so we believe in more that the soul continues after this world, um, that it's a better place. and that there are really like many worlds. It's a constant journey, and you die from the womb to be born into this world. You have to die in this world to be born into the next, and kind of the the quote that sticks in my head from the Baha'i writings is death is hard for the living.
Mm.
And so that to me really mitigated a lot of the grief, um, because my philosophy was less about my mom's gone, I've lost my mother, and more of it's shifted. My relationship with my mother has shifted. It's
That's
not the
such a
same, but it's not gone. She's still here. She's still around. She's still able to communicate with us in ways. It's not nearly as clear. Sometimes it's very confusing,
well, she was
but
a
it's
shaman.
there.
She might find very clear
Yeah.
ways of doing that.
Well, a couple. I think we were when Ross and I started getting serious. I don't. Again, I have no idea when this was. It was sometime before we were married. Um, she had a dream that she was in this house and she's walking through this house and she walks into this room and there's my mother just sitting on a chair watching her for a while. And I was like, oh yeah. So that's a clear message. Okay.
Yeah, she's approving, she's
Yeah.
approving, she's
Yeah.
oh,
But so that idea of like this person is dead and gone
mhm,
doesn't apply to me. I don't believe that. I think yes, the body is dead, but the spirit is still around. It's
mhm.
still intermingling with this world and how we interact with stuff, and so it comes and goes, and you go okay. So I think that in turn was something as well, faith and kind of a belief in kind of a life after death system, if
Mhm.
you will, also made it a lot easier to work through some of that grief and process through that to be like, all right, it's just different now. That's really all it is. It's just different.
Mhm.
And it's not about it's gone forever and I'll never see her again. I'll never communicate with her again. Like that's not a thing. So,
It's even like how you're saying, because I mean, I'm getting chills because I can totally relate to what you're saying. I completely know what I can
mhm,
it that's the thing with grief. I'm like, I get it, I get it. I totally get that because that's how I feel about it as well with my mom. But it's kind of like even your relationship with Roz having been even long distance, you were on the
mhm,
phone, you weren't even in person, yet you were
right.
having right. So it's even to that extent of relationships that you could still build. My relationship, my husband too, and I, we dated long distance before we only lived in the same place for a month before we got married. So
We never did
saying,
that.
yeah, oh, you didn't even do that. Okay, for us, like
No.
a month, but it's like, but we only dated 8 months. So, and it
Hmm.
was all long distance. So the same kind of situation that we had to also dive deep, have these deep conversations. So now, in relation, then we've even that comparing it to the relationship that's now different with our moms, with our loved ones that have passed on, it's that it's just a different communication system right
Hmm.
now because it's just they're
Yeah.
not just physically here. And yes, we can't just pick up the phone, but there's other ways in which we
Yeah.
can connect.
For sure.
Uh, I want to hear if you can share this part and then we'll wrap it up. How do you talk about her to, well, Chase, I guess, because Connor's too little. Like, how do you
Yeah.
keep her memory alive in your home?
So yeah, it's a at times it can be a little sticky because my dad has remarried, um,
Mhm.
and he remarried before uh, Chase was born. So
So he doesn't have a concept of having seen him by himself. Yeah,
yeah,
I got it.
right.
Uh-huh.
There was my dad was never alone
Mhm.
before Chase was after Chase was born, and he wasn't with my mom. So we definitely talk about Grandma Kathy all the time.
Mm.
We do bring her up a lot. We talk about her a lot. And my brother is really good about doing that with his kids, and so we talk. Whenever we see them or talk to them, it comes up, and we talk about that, and we kind of keep her alive in that sense. We have pictures and things like that. Um, and we haven't quite gotten the question yet about like how does your Grandma Kathy, Gambu, and Gemma all fit together in this puzzle.
Mhm.
He hasn't quite gotten there yet, um,
Mhm.
but I'm a pretty direct and forward person, And I was like, and when that comes, we'll talk about it, and we'll say, well, this is what happened, and and it's interesting because it's led into conversations about death in general. He's had some experience, like our dog. We put our dog down 3 years ago. He was 3, so he didn't quite get it, but he does get it now, and so we use that kind of correlation for him when he
Mm-hmm.
asks about like where is Grandma Kathy, we're like, well, she's in the next world, right? She's with Costas. Remember when he had to go away and he went to the next world because he got sick? And he was like, oh yeah, okay. Like so, it's kind of that kind of helps a little bit. Um,
And now you have this other dog now, like, yeah, so
yeah,
it's like, yeah, so and, it just, yeah, brings that concept together. Yeah, I think you're right in terms of just answering as they ask, right?
yeah,
With kids,
yeah,
as they start asking, then you start answering. We don't necessarily have to put it all there at the on the table at the all
sure.
at once necessarily. It's just as they start asking more questions about life after death and so forth,
Hmm.
then we do. But yeah, the grief component, like my kids did get to experience my mom. My
Hmm.
dad is also remarried now, for the last year. But even that component of was also something we also had to deal with the grief of even that
Yeah.
aspect, a new
Oh
change.
yeah.
And it didn't take away from the fact that we were so happy, for my dad, but we still had to
Yeah.
deal with our own personal
Hmm.
grief, and so that dynamic happens as well. Now,
Yeah.
what are you most grateful for the experiences that you've had, not only of your mom's passing, but then also of your friend when you were in college, and then the other ones, in terms of the things that have happened that have been hard? What
Hmm.
are you most grateful for in your own growth and your own awakening as a person, or whatever? What things have come from that?
Um, I think that like my friends and stuff in high school and college, it was really the benefit was kind of being prepared for when my mom passed.
Mm,
And when my mom passed, it was kind of like it really, in a way, was the floodgates opening of being like, you got to stop bottling all this stuff up. You got to start to work on letting it out a little more effectively. Um, and that's kind of a lifelong journey, really. But it was a kind of the opening of the door. And once a door is opened, you can't really close it again. So
floodgates.
once you've cried about something in public, it's kind of silly to stop crying about
Mhm.
it. Like you're in a classroom with a bunch of people you've kind of met. Some of them, but not all of them, and you're like really sobbing because your mom passed away 4 or 5 days ago. Like after that, it's like, all right, I can cry about anything in this class, and it really doesn't matter anymore. you, you
That's
know,
awesome. So it
I
allowed you to just openly express it
yeah.
yourself. If that
It
so
was
that's one of the things that it taught you. Was that also a big part for you then in this aspect of the emotional component, emotional vocabulary that you kind of focus in your practice? Was that because you were
um
studying at that moment, or was that something that just always interested you in your therapy kind of work?
well, I think the emotional intelligence really became interesting to me in when working in the residential facilities
Mhm.
because I was seeing people, kids and families, because the kids would come stay with us, but we would do family therapy with them twice a week. So we would push these parents to come into the facility, and I would see these grown-ups that had no emotional intelligence either.
Mm.
And I was like, how have you gotten to 45 years old and you don't know how to say you're lonely or you're hurt? How does that
Oh
work?
my
And
gosh, that's
was just surprised by it, but now I'm like, oh no, there's a lot of people that can't do that. And
so
and it's not about them being idiots or stupid. It's that our culture is stupid.
oh,
It's the culture that's being dumb here. And this machismo thing of just power through, just be strong, just and you just
mm,
push through. And I think that's, to my personal opinion, is that's why we see such high rates of substance abuse and addiction right now, or one of the reasons,
mhm. 'Cause
because
they
you got
don't know how
people
to
that can't
deal
let
with
it
it.
out.
So it's a way of numbing
Yeah,
it. Yeah, numbing it because
yeah.
they don't know how to deal with it. Yeah. No,
Hmm.
that is just so valuable. So thank you. I just wanted to kinda just know how it was that maybe if that influenced at all your choice in
Yeah,
your
not
focus
so
of
much with my mom. I think it was more that like what it is now is kind of looking back and realizing that when I was really, 10, 11, 12, and my mom was forcing me to sit on the couch with my brother because we just had a fight about something. And she's like, but what are you feeling? I'm like, I'm angry. She's like, yeah, I know, but what are you feeling? And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. And like realizing now, like, oh, what she was trying to do was teach me emotional vocabulary and
Mm,
emotional intelligence in the moment. She was trying to help me understand what it was I was going through instead of just letting me rage for 20 minutes and then blow it off and then cool down and be like, all right, well, good thing that's over. Like she
mhm.
wasn't going to ignore it. She faced it head on and kind of powered through a lot of the anger and frustration to get to the soft underbelly below that. And that has become, the lesson that I've gotten from my mom with that is like, oh, okay, so when my 6 year old is throwing a tantrum, I have to just power through that and just wait for
Mm.
that to finish to where he's really upset and crying. We get past the anger to the sadness, and then we can start to talk about the sadness. Like,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. We're talking about, how we're talking about the soul even just continuing, just even the aspect of the things that continue even within us, like just how you're explaining now that those lessons that you learned from your mom are now carrying on even through you, right? Like
Hmm.
all so she is with you, even in those moments of
Hmm.
parenting and so forth too, because not
Hmm.
only of what she taught you when she was alive, but just you still carry her memory even just that way. So it's
Yeah.
just so beautiful. So thank you. Any last moment, things you'd like to say and to the audience or that I did not ask that you'd like to share?
Um, I don't know. I
I don't want
think
you to like after we hang up, like be like in the middle. Oh man, I
no, I'm
forgot to
just
tell her this story.
no,
Oh, I
I'm
forgot to
just
tell
trying to
her
think.
because I think that sometimes like, oh, I forgot to ask this.
I
So
mean, no, it's just interesting. I think that growing, I'm naturally not afraid of death and spooks and ghosts and things like that. So to me, there've been a couple of incidents, not with my mom necessarily, but prior to that, where I had you know would see something that I was like, all right, that can't be, or something would happen. We go, that there's no other explanation for this.
mm,
and and as like I was like 17 and was working at a grocery store, and I saw this guy out of the corner of my eye, an older gentleman just standing there, and I was working, and so I turned to talk to him, and there's nobody there. And I think my the way my mom raised me, and talking to me, the way my dad raised me to talk to me about this stuff, like that stuff was not scary. So
mhm,
this and that you start talking, if you take away the fear of ghosts and the supernatural, then you take away a lot of the fear of death.
mm,
So that when somebody passes, you go, all right, okay. I mean, it sucks for me, but she gets to do all this amazing stuff now. So there was that kind of stuff that was like, I think that was really helpful, is some of those experiences that I had early, younger, when I was like 15, 16, 17, of like, oh, okay, this dude is not there. You look, and you get to the point where I'm looking out of the corner of my eye, I can see this guy clearly standing there. I know there's a person there. Then you turn and look and he's gone. You go,
mm.
what is that supposed to be? I don't know. But to me, it was a very soothing presence because of the
Your upbringing.
family view
Yeah,
of it. And
right.
I just didn't have fear around it. So I think that this idea of like accustoming children to the concept of death, to the concept of the soul moving on and things like that, makes it really easier. I mean, one of the lessons, pets teach us a lot of things:
Oh, that yeah.
responsibility, unconditional love. Like
Mm,
animals love unconditionally, humans do not always love unconditionally.
mm,
Um, and the final lesson that any individual pet can teach you is how to handle death.
mhm.
Like that's just, and it's
Parents
just,
miss that boat sometimes too. I've had this
yeah,
conversation before. Sometimes, when, Chase was only 3, then when his dog died, you did
yeah.
not tell him that the dog went to a
Well,
farm to live with
no,
the
he came with
other
us.
dog. He went
He
with you.
ta-
Okay, he
he
was
went with
part
us to
of
the
it.
vet.
Yeah.
I
He
mean,
was
I
part of it. Yeah.
he didn't really know what was going on. I don't think he really grasped what was happening, but he knew that mommy and daddy and Gamba were all really upset and sad and crying,
Mhm.
and he knew that we walked in carrying Costas and we walked out without Costas. Like he
Mhm.
figured that out.
Mhm.
And now he did, a day or two later ask, when are we going back to get Costas? So he
Oh.
didn't quite get it. But we'd also, he'd had that experience where we'd drop him off and come back a few hours later to pick him up. Like he'd had that before. So
Mhm.
like there was some of that where he was a little confused, but it was he was there and I wasn't going to hide it from him.
Mhm.
Like this is not something that I'm not a believer in lying to kids about
Mhm.
anything. Um like he's not, he didn't go to some farm somewhere and he's not still living there. Like no, he's dead. And we
Mhm.
can talk
I
about it.
I think that the biggest lessons in this conversation I've had with you and the things that have come up the most have been the aspect of really just being open to these conversations, like
Mhm.
just again naming the emotions with the emotional
Yeah.
vocabulary, being open with having conversations about life and death, using those opportunities that we have
Mhm.
in order to teach our kids and also teach ourselves, how to handle those those
Yeah.
conversations and so forth. We get to kind of practice, and it's not always going to turn out the way we want. Like
No.
we may not say the right thing as we're trying to
Mhm.
explain to our kids, the concept of life after death or whatever it is that each family believes as they're educating their children about what
Mhm.
happens when somebody dies. You follow whatever beliefs, bring you comfort, or whatever you've brought up to believe. You and I happen to have the same beliefs of life after death. So
Mhm.
therefore it is I don't know, it does bring some, comfort, of course,
Mhm.
having those beliefs for
Sure.
sure. When we're faced with it, again, it doesn't make it necessarily that it's a walk in the park type of thing, but it
Right.
does make it manageable. And as you
Yeah.
said, a lot of times we've gone through already hard things in our life that we don't even realize
Mhm.
that we've already overcome, that we're even, I'm not saying harder, but have been hard. And therefore, like your mom would say, you keep going and you keep
Yeah.
keep living. You keep living, like she made you basically keep living your life after
Mhm.
your friend
Yeah.
died. And that's something you did then when she died. You just carried on her tradition as how
Just
she
keep going.
guided you,
Yeah.
as
Because
she guided
the
you to
reality
create.
is I don't want my kids to fall apart when I go.
Mhm.
Like the running joke is that I keep telling my wife that one day I'm gonna write a will, and when I do, in that will I want them to hire a comedian to come tell at my memorial to just tell jokes about death. Like
Mm.
like this is not supposed to be sad. When my mom's memorial, this is what I did forget to mention. Um, One of the things that we did when my mom passed, we did a memorial for her, but it was not like a. We were very clear. We did not want it to be
Celebrating her
everybody's
life.
going to come and cry. This is
Mhm.
going to be there's going to be crying. That's just what it
Yeah.
is. And there were a few people that were invited to speak, and those who, yeah, we said some stuff. It was great. But then we also played games, like huge team games.
Mm.
So everybody who was there got divided into four teams, and then we did like a giant group charades, and we did this and that because there was one of the things my mom was so good at was figuring out and creating games that got people playing and talking to each other when they didn't, like icebreaker games, right? People don't know each other. She was really good at taking a big group, mixing it up, and getting everybody talking to everybody so that you didn't have the same three or four people that know each other sitting over in a corner and these people over here and everybody kind of separated. She brought everybody together. And so
Mm.
that's what we kind of wanted to do. And I love that idea so much. We did it at my wedding. We got 200 people to play these games, and only three or four of them stayed at the tables and didn't join in.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
I would that must have been the most awkward
it was
thing, just
incredible.
being the no, the 3 to being the 3 that didn't play.
Oh, yeah, exactly. At that point, it's like, well, now you're the weird one. You're the weird ones. Good, be weird. But like it was really great because we didn't know how that was going to go. It was like,
Uh-huh.
if people sit down and they don't join, that's fine. But I think the groups are big enough that it won't matter if 50 people stay seated. But then everybody got up. It was so cool. And that kind of mentality for all things, not just this is a wedding, it's a celebration, but like, no, this is a memorial. It's also a celebration. It shouldn't be
Yes, of the
sad.
life. Yeah, of the
I
life
am
of
a, I'm very against the idea of being sad at a memorial or about people who have died. Don't be sad for them. That's
mhm,
not reasonable. They're fine. Whether you believe in life after death or not. If you don't believe in life after death, they've disappeared, they're non existent, they don't feel anything. If you do
mhm.
believe in life after death, they're in a better place. It doesn't matter. We have no reason to be sad for them. We can be sad for ourselves, but at the memorial, let's remember how wonderful they were. When my friend passed in high school or in college, I went to his house. It was a weird situation for me actually in a way because I was the only friend of his that he really brought into his house, into his family. So I knew his aunts and uncles, I knew his cousins, um, his grandparents. I knew all of these people in his family, whereas most of our friends did not. Now, granted, he died of an overdose, so that tells you what kind of activities he was involved in.
Hmm.
So a lot of the people that he was hanging out with were not the most upstanding citizens.
They
So
were the ones you
can
would
understand.
socialize with, or yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
not bring to family dinner.
right.
You were the only one that
The
like,
only
"This
one,
is my only normal friend. Let me bring
but
him to the family dinner."
yeah, but so it was weird because after we did the memorial and the funeral for him and the burial, we all went back. Everybody went back to his house, his parents' house, and the family was all inside, and the friends were outside. And I found myself really going back and forth.
Mhm.
Spending 10, 15 minutes inside, 10, 15 minutes outside, 10, 15 minutes inside. And eventually I ended up spending more time outside because the house was just so depressed. Everybody
Mm,
was so sad. Now, granted, he was 19. Like, it's
mhm,
really tragic. But again, I don't feel bad for him now. Like at this point, it's done. There's nothing we can't do anything for him and change that situation. And I do believe he's in a better place anyway. So what am I going to be upset about for him? Let's move on. And so in his situation, it was the family was really caught up on the tragedy and the depression of it, but the friends were outside making jokes and laughing about it and
mm,
telling me, and not just like making jokes but also telling really funny stories, like, oh dude, remember when we did this, and can you believe we didn't get caught for that? And that was, to me, I was like, these kids kind of understand the celebration of life right now, so I'm going
mhm,
to go celebrate over here and spend a
mm,
little bit more time with them, kind of thing. And I think that it's just so, it was such a juxtaposition of like the the way kind of many people in the world view it, of like, well, we got to sit and be really sad and depressed and wail. And I mean, you can do that, no judgment. If people want to do that and that's what they need, great, do it. If that helps you process, wonderful. I'm not saying you can't or shouldn't do those things. We have to go through the grief and the sadness. It is part of the process. You can't move through it if you don't ever go through it.
mhm. If you
You
don't
can't
actually
come out the other side
yeah.
into the place where the happy memories take over more than the sad memories, right? Like,
Mhm,
the joy of having been a part of this person's life, in my opinion, needs to take over the sadness of losing them, or else
mhm,
it's just miserable constantly. But so we have to go through that. I'm not saying don't go through that. To me, a memorial needs to be hilarious and telling stories of the person's life, whether they're funny or not, just like interesting aspects. Things like, oh, I didn't know that they did that kind of thing, and I didn't know they did that. That's so cool. Like just telling cool, fun elements and celebrating the life. Like, we're all going to go grieve in our own way anyway.
mhm.
Like, the grief process is going to take a long time. This is not something that we go to a memorial, we
Exactly,
cry about it, we're done.
and then
Like, that'd be
yes,
nice, but it's not.
that is so true. Yeah, it doesn't mean that just because a funeral was a certain way or something like that,
Yeah.
that's just how it's gonna carry on forever for the rest of your life. It does change. It does change because doesn't your grief look very different now than it did, 9 years ago?
I
Like,
mean, yeah, I guess
it's
I
still
wouldn't
there,
even
it's just
call it.
different.
I wouldn't even
What
call it
would you
grief.
call it? What would you call it at this point?
At this point, it's just like it's just a way of life now, right? Like, I'm not sad that she's gone. I'm not sad that she's passed. I'm disappointed that she didn't get to come to my wedding. I'm disappointed that she didn't get to hold her grandchildren. Like, that's disappointing. But it's not devastating. I'm not sad about it. I don't cry about it. I go, you know what? She's just holding them in a different way. She
Mm,
hugs them in a different way. It's she knows who they are. She's aware of them. Like, this is what it is. Like, this is not a thing of she's never going to experience this. She's experiencing it. It's just different.
different, just different.
So to me,
Absolutely.
like the way, and this is my personal definition. I don't know what I'm not a grief therapist, so I don't know the clinical definition of how this works. I don't focus on it really too much. But like for me, the grief was the sadness and the pain and the crying and the real the pain of it, of the loss. But I don't feel that pain of loss anymore. Now it's just an adjustment and going like, all right, well, yes, it's I'm over the pain. I've moved past the pain of the loss, and now it's just wonderful memories, joyful memories. Some not so not so great memories. She was my mom. She wasn't perfect. Spent a lot of money with my therapist working through some stuff with her and my dad.
And that's
Like that's
important.
what we
What you
do.
just said right now is so important too, because sometimes that's another thing that happens in grief is that we
Yeah,
only start focusing on all the good things about, and we forget that it was a regular dynamic and
yeah,
relationship, that there were some things that weren't working that well either, and
yeah.
we
One of the
forget that.
things
Yeah.
one of the things I said at her memorial, her 10-year memorial we did last year.
Yeah,
I have no
because you
idea. I
said
have no idea.
2009. Yeah, because you said because
Yeah,
it's
because my wife was
2020.
pregnant. That's right.
You said
Yeah,
2020, so 2019. Mhm.
yeah. So 2019. Yeah, so it was last year, almost 2 years ago. But one of the things that I had said, I was doing a lot of work with my therapist around my mom at that time, and one of the things I shared with the community that came was this idea of like, right now I'm doing a lot of personal work around my mom, so I'm very angry at her for a lot of things, and that's okay. She
Mhm.
was not perfect. But I'm also very grateful because the things I'm angry at her about don't even come close to the things she was angry at her parents about.
Mm.
Right? So, like, I'm grateful at the work that she did so that now I can do my work, but it's not even close to
To how
what
much
she
work
had to do.
she had to do. Yeah,
Yeah.
because the work she had to do ended up being that also, as she was working through the things of her own childhood, she was also having you
Right.
guys be in
Yeah.
therapy as well, so that you guys could be able to work
Yeah.
through the things as she was working through hers. It was like this
Hmm.
ladder, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so then right now, you may not have to do the same now with Chase and Connor. Like, they may not have those
Exactly.
things because you've been
They'll,
able
well,
to
they'll
break it. They'll have other things, other
they'll
things.
have other things. You cannot. It's not possible to not screw up your kids. Uh, and actually, I kind of think it's necessary because without
Because
pain,
in
there
that
is no
way,
growth.
well, yeah, there you go, yeah, and that's a very good quote too, that in the Baha'i writings regarding,
Yeah.
the Weshu pain aspect, the aspect of going through
Hmm.
something to be
Hmm.
able to grow through it. And you're right, and we don't know. Even if we like smother them with love and never scold them, we still would mess them up, right?
Well,
So
sure, because they don't learn how to. They don't learn if all you ever do is smother them with love and everything is wonderful. They don't learn how to stand on their 2 feet when
exactly.
that's gone.
Right. So it's like either way, we're gonna mess it up. So you're right. So
Yeah.
it's like let's
So
just do our best.
do the best you can. Don't worry about it. It's funny because I've had conversations with family and friends and other people who have young kids, and they're like, "God, I'm a terrible father. I'm a terrible mother. I'm terrible at this." I'm like, "No. Does your kid have food? Do you hit
Yes.
them? Are they going to school? Okay, you're good enough. Now try to do better. Just do a little bit better than you can do. Like as long as you're trying, like when you recognize that you have a weakness in something, you got to work on it. I'm not saying this as a free pass. Like do what you want. They got to grow anyway. No,
Mm,
like, but it takes the pressure off for me. Like I know where my problem areas are and the things I need to work on. I'm doing the best I can in that, but I'm also not going to sit here and beat myself up because something happened. I'm like, man, I yelled at my kid again when I really shouldn't have. Like,
mhm.
okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I've been stuck with these two kids for the last 9 months.
Normal.
My
It's
wife gets to leave. She
normal.
gets to get out of the house. I start falling into that mentality. But like, you go, okay, we're all being traumatized by this pandemic. So let's
Mhm.
just cut ourselves some slack here a little bit. He's going
Mhm.
to throw tantrums because he's 6 and doesn't get to play with other kids.
Mhm.
I'm gonna throw tantrums because he's 6 and he doesn't get to
'Cause you
get out of the house and go to other kids'
and
houses
you're
and play with
and you're
them.
40, yeah, and you're 40, and you don't get to go out and play with
Yeah,
your
I
you're
don't get
like,
to
"You
go play with other people. Like
you're
I
like,
don't get my
I only
time.
get to video." Yeah, I only play with
Well,
them on video games now.
yeah, my whole life plan got thrown upside down. Like I was supposed to be home with the baby working on my business. Instead, I'm home with
Yeah,
a dog, a baby, and a 6-year-old, a teaching assistant, a daycare assistant, and a dog trainer. And my business got pushed to the side. Like all of this, there's grief around that. Like having
yeah.
that I would say is my current grief is like I'm really frustrated that I've not been able to put the time into the business that I want because both my wife and I would like our roles to change. She wants to be home with
Mhm.
the kids. I want to be working, but I like neither one of us are in a place right now because of the way the world is. to really take steps that are necessary to make that flip.
And
It's just there's
you
just a lot
learn
going
to
on.
address. Yeah, but as you were saying, like even just before, because of with going through any experience helps you then go through another one, right? The
Hmm.
death of your friends in high school, and then your friend when you were 19, and then with your helped you with your mom's death. Then
Hmm.
also all those things with grief help you even manage some of the experiences and emotions that are going on through this grief right now that everybody's
Hmm.
experiencing, with your life not turning out exactly what you had planned, because that's kind of what we've had to get used to, that it
Yeah.
does throw us a lot of curveballs a lot of times, and we just kind of have
Oh
to
yeah.
go with it. And so
You
yeah,
got to
it
keep
it
rolling
makes us resilient. It makes us flexible with life, and then we learn to dust off and keep
and
going.
keep going. And it's funny. Like I really don't like a lot of the male tropes, but the one that I've been when we're at home and it's me and the boys, I try to play like slower music to kind of it's some attempt at keeping the energy down. It doesn't really work, but I like to tell myself it does. And so we listen to a lot of like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and stuff, and we do have talks about like, oh, this song is really sexist, or this song is really racist, and we can't listen to that song anymore. Let's turn that one off.
Really? Now
Oh
I'm gonna have
yeah.
to really? Oh wow,
Oh
now I'm gonna
man, the Frank Sinatra radio station on Alexa on Amazon Music is full of stuff where you're like, oh, that doesn't fly anymore.
interesting.
But one of the songs that's come on that kind of bothered me initially, but I've kind of recognized the beauty of it, is Frank Sinatra's "That's Life,"
Mhm.
because it's like it's all just about resiliency.
Mhm.
You know, it's like you're on top in April, on your back in May, back on top in June. Just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start all over again. Like you don't have to start all over again, but like figuring out how to pivot and shift, and
Yes.
how do you just make it like keep doing it, just keep going. The other one is Dory from Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming, just
Yeah,
keep swimming, just keep swimming. Like
yeah.
super obnoxious. When someone's telling you that, it's really obnoxious. I've definitely, with the 14 and 15-year-olds in the rehab facilities, when they were complaining about stuff, I'd look at them and just keep swimming. They did
Oh,
not like that. Didn't work real
no, no,
well.
and that didn't work in their grief component in that moment either. It won't work for somebody
No,
in that moment that if somebody's just gone through something. You can't just tell them, "Oh,
right.
stand up, dust off, and keep going." No, no, no. You
But
can't just,
but
but
there's an
but
element. There is an element of saying don't stop.
right. Yes.
You can't
Yeah.
say just like, and the way you talk about it, like my mom didn't look at me and give me some cliche trope about like just keep going. No, she was very direct and very clear and very intent about it, and was acknowledging. She was like, I know this is the hardest thing you've ever had to deal with when my friend
Mhm.
passed. She was like, I know this is really difficult. I know it's so hard. I know that all you want to do is lay in bed and watch TV and not do anything. We can't allow that to happen. You
Mm.
have to go back to school, like, and so these kinds of things of like you have to keep moving forward, you have to keep going on, even if it's just a couple of steps, like, for me going back to school, I'm pretty sure I didn't learn anything in those first couple of weeks at school after my friend passed. I don't remember I don't remember what classes I was in, like, it was because it's such a blur and you're like
Mm.
but
You're just going
the
through the motions. Yeah, you're just
just
going
going through
through
the motions. But it's the
Mhm.
idea of fake it till you make it, right? If you have to go through the motions till you're back in the groove
Mhm.
to some degree. You can't. I was listening. I don't remember who it was. I picked a couple of episodes of your podcast last night to listen to, um, and one of the women was she was talking. Her husband had died, and she had two small kids. I don't remember what it was.
Mhm.
But she
And
said something like, "Life doesn't stop just because my husband passed and I'm devastated. Like, I still got to get out of bed and feed the kids. I still got to figure out, we still got to go to the grocery store. We still got to make sure we got toilet paper. I got to do laundry. Like, these are things that have to keep happening. You like, and even if that's what you're pushing and trying to do, and I think my mom's point was not about power through and just pretend it didn't happen. It was more about don't let this impact your life any more than it has to. It's already
mm,
going to take up all your free time. You're already going to be sad and depressed with these friend groups, right? Like that's given and it's appropriate and it's reasonable. You're going to lose some sleep over it. You're going to stop. You're going to lose, maybe not eat as much for a little while because of it. We're going to accept all of that and just keep and say that's okay. But don't give things up. because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't give up school. Don't give up a job. Don't give up on a relationship. You know, like whatever. Don't give up on volunteer service or hobbies or things like utilize these things to help you, right? Tap into those. You know, work and class became a nice distraction because I was like, I gotta try and focus on this long enough to remember for the test what I need to know. You know, and that kind of thing. It becomes something to hold on to. There's it's a for me it was going back to school, going back up to college, and going to work and stuff was a semblance of normalcy to hold on to.
I think that that is so valid. And what I, for example, I'm a little bit, and well, I kept going, but I'm more the type that I do, if I need to like just completely like decompress and just like, feel, I actually do kind of disconnect for like a
Okay.
little bit. And for me, it actually ends up helping me be able to then focus on the other things. But I don't know if it has to do with the personality types too, like the doers, the people that, that
Yeah.
are the doers, and that's kind of how they navigate their grief, is still the doing. For me, like I feel like I need to like sit with it,
Sure.
but it's a very fine line, as you're saying before, because if somebody is a doer, for example, and it's the type that work is what keeps them kind of alive, and they do let go of job, then you already are grieving now two things, right? The person
Mm-hmm.
that died, and then the job that you've just let go, because your life now has changed twice as much,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not, like it's just one more thing that you're taking away.
Yeah.
So that's, I
Yeah.
think, the importance of keep going and keep doing, is because if you
And
start shifting and changing so many other things in your life, then there's other secondary grief
right.
process that you'll have to go through.
And I think that what you said that was so important is the idea of and you were I mean I don't know if you said it directly, but intentionally taking time to sit in it
Hmm.
is so important. It's not about an open ended, like my friend who dropped out of college because her father passed away. It wasn't a thing of like, well, I'll just come home and I'm going to work around the house to help get the house cleaned out, take care of his stuff and figure these things out and do and move towards the working through the process and then going back to school. There was no real end date. There was no
Hmm.
end time. So I'm all about taking time and allowing for it if it's a set period of time.
Hmm.
Now, maybe it needs to be extended a little bit. Maybe it can be shortened a little bit. Everybody's grieving process and timing is different. So I'm not here to
Yes.
say one size fits all. But what I do think is important is that if a person feels the need and can benefit from taking time, wonderful. Just make sure that it's a contained time frame
Yes.
and
Yes.
space. And that it's like, I'm going to take a week off of work or I'm going to take a week off. I'm going to not go to school for a week. I don't know any college professor that's going to be like, no, get your ass back in class.
Hmm.
No, they're
Hmm.
gonna be like, take your time, take a week, fine, no problem. You can make up the assignments whenever you need to, no rush, right? Like nobody's gonna fault anyone for taking a week off of work or anything like that, unless you got a real difficult boss. But like the idea is like, for me, it's about if you're gonna take that time, you have to be specific about it and intentional, and that this week is for this. And I'm going to let
Hmm.
myself lay in bed, go literally from bed to the couch and the couch to the bed. I'm just going to eat ice cream for a week, and then it's back to daily life, right? Or whatever
Yeah.
it is,
I
you
remember
know?
what I learned about that aspect of having an end was I had a big breakup before I met my husband, and my
Hmm.
friend that I was living with, she was like, "I give you 3 days. You're allowed 3 days. You can
Yeah,
cry for him for 3 days. He does not deserve a day more from you. 3 days, that's it. You
yeah.
cry, you weep, then you move on." Like, she gave me
Hmm.
that ultimatum, 3 days.
I,
So it
it's
just depends on and
it
that's it
really
actually
does.
worked for me. It really worked
Yeah,
for me. 3
it
days of
really works.
real wallowing, and then I moved on.
Yeah, and I've done that. Like I'd gotten fired from my first real job after college. They hired me for a job I was not good for, and I was not capable of, and I didn't have the skills for. And after 3 weeks, they let me go. I think the guy did it on purpose just to get rid of me. Because I'd interned there for a year, so he kind of had to offer me a job, but he didn't really want me. So whatever. Anyway,
Oh,
I got fired. I came home. I called my girlfriend at the time, and she drove up. She was about an hour and a half away. She drove up and hung out for the day, and um, The next morning, she went home, and the next morning, I woke up and my mom I was kind of moping around the house a little bit, and my mom was like, "Okay, you had yesterday. You did a good thing. You called a friend and got some support and did that. Great. Now that job, similar conversations your roommate had with you. Like she's like,
Yeah.
wasn't a good job for you anyway. So now you need to
Mhm.
start the process of finding a job."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, that's a little fast, but okay." you know, but
Yeah.
it's this idea of like, do what needs to be done, recognizing that whether you're grieving a death, a loss of a relationship because there's a breakup or somebody moves, or something breaks, whatever it is, or a project that falls through, or someone's writing a book and then someone else comes publishes a book that's the exact same thing. Like
Mm,
we need to grieve the loss of that energy and that effort and that time. It's going to take a while. You can do that while you're doing other things, right? Like, so
yeah.
take some time at the beginning to sit in it and be sad and move through that stuff. Great, wonderful. But don't let that take over life.
Yes.
And what that looks like is different. For me, it means I can't really stop at all. If I stop, I'm done. Like, I need to just keep moving. As long as I'm moving forward, I will be able to process and deal with whatever I need to deal with in the free time. If I stop, getting started for me, whatever it is super hard. It takes so much
Mhm.
more energy for me to get something started. And so once it's going, I can't stop or I'm gonna like really fall down. So like even in the pandemic, my I'm still seeing clients. It's only a few. I think I'm down to two right now. But I'm like, I can't just close and give up on clients right now because I'll never open the practice again if I do.
Mhm.
And I'll just be
Mm.
real miserable. I have to keep. I'm like I have a consulting person that I go see, or it's kind of a program thing that I do for my business. I still go to the meetings every 2 weeks. I'm still active on the Facebook group as much as I can be. I listen to this dude's podcast. I'm in no way, shape, or form in a place where I can really put time and energy into my business. By the time the boys go to bed, the only thing I can do is fall on the couch, right, and just
Mhm.
exhausted. So the idea of doing other work is just not realistic right now for me in my life. But like other doors open and other things have come up that I'm like, all right, I got it. As long as I just keep moving, just keep it moving, even if it's just seeing these two clients every other week,
Mhm.
and sorting things out and figuring it out. That's good enough for now. As long as it's still doing something, then it's not completely stopped, and I'm not just giving up on it. Because I think for me in my brain, stopping equates giving up.
Yeah, and that's important to know. Exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying is knowing who you are, your personality around any area of your life to know how it is that you navigate all these different situations. And what you're saying that it takes actually more energy to start again, like a car. It is very true. It's like I'm thinking of it like a car, right? You turn off the
Hmm.
car, a lot more energy actually
Yeah.
sometimes goes in than if you would have just left it on, even running,
Yep.
even if you're waiting for somebody at the store, you probably use less gas or energy
You
just leaving
do.
it running, right?
You know what?
Than
There's science
turning
that
it off
proves
and
that.
coming on. Yeah. So then turning it off and coming back on. So that's an actual physical example of the aspect of using energy, and that
Yeah.
goes into this ourselves as well when we just completely just stop doing something to then try to take off again.
100%.
Yeah.
Hundred
So
percent.
so
And
no.
and
Oh
that's
my gosh.
that's me. That's my
Yeah.
personality and that's who I am. And so for me, when my mom says don't let it take you out, I'm like, I can't skip anything. I think when my friend passed away, I missed 2 days of school total. The day I went
Mhm.
home the day after he passed away, and the day his memorial and funeral. That was it. When my mom passed away, I missed. It was grad school, so each class was only once a week, but I missed that whole first week of class. So I
Mhm.
missed
But
like
then you
three
went
class,
back to there. You
one
went back
one of
to
each
free
class.
therapy. But then you
Yeah,
went
well,
back to free therapy.
yeah, I know. But I had like so it was three. I missed one class from each of the three classes I was courses I was taking. Like I
Mhm.
wouldn't let myself do more than that because I was like I can't. If I stay in this for too long, I'm just going to be miserable, and it's going to go down, and I'm not going to go back to school. I'm going to just say, you know what, screw it, and then I've got all these student loans for nothing.
Mhm. No, thank you. That it's been really, really good to hear this other perspective because I am one of, again, like I said, I am one of those that would sit with things. I'm like, you need time, go ahead, take it. But you're right
Mhm.
in terms of making it having it have a timeline a little bit, even though grief doesn't have a timeline, like you said, for
Right,
everybody's not the same.
right.
Knowing that you have to kind of, for the heavy part of the grief, when I feel like grief continues, it just changes, like you said,
Yeah.
sometimes it looks like disappointment, sometimes it looks like this, "Oh,
Hmm.
man, I'm so bummed she wasn't here for my wedding," like, so maybe those emotions of the missing them in some shape or form kinda come up, but not in the sadness, but more the missing
Yeah.
component of them.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I've learned so much from your perspective, so thank you.
My pleasure. I think it's funny because I always struggle a little bit with the the grief never ends mentality.
Mhm,
Now, this is coming from, and again, this is from my perspective as a therapist who worked in substance use. I have dealt with far too many clients that use that as an excuse to
mm,
continue using or to let their lives fall apart. Whether it's for themselves or it's the family members trying to, enable their loved one to continue using. Where they go, well, his father did hit him that one time 2 years ago. I'm like, yeah, we
mhm.
can be over that. We can have
Mhm.
moved past that by now. He doesn't get to continue using drugs because of
As
that.
a
I'm sorry.
scapegoat, not using
Yeah,
it as a scapegoat,
it becomes a
that for our
scapegoat,
lives.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I agree with it. It
Mhm,
is true. Grief does not end. There is no timeline for it. There's no
mhm,
set prescription for it. How it works. It's different in everyone. But
mhm,
I think what but that becomes a mantra for people to allow themselves to sink deeper and deeper and deeper. I'm sure that my friend who dropped out of college was not like, "Sweet, I'm dropping out of college. This is wonderful." No, she like had every intention to go back, but
mhm.
then was just wallowing in the sadness for so long
Yeah.
that it was no longer processing. It became just wallowing in self flagellation and become self punishment, right?
Mm,
So
mm.
we have to be careful as we go through our grief work, um, to make sure that we're doing it productively. As long
Yes.
as a person is doing their grief work productively, I don't care how long it takes. If they're actively working on it and trying to push through it, but if they're laying at home and they're just getting depressed and worse, and it's not moving at
Mm,
all, then I start to question. And this is my therapist brain plus substance, all of that stuff is kind of
yeah.
kicking in here.
Yeah, your
Where I start
background,
to
your
go
own
like, all right, you're just laying in this.
mhm.
Now you're choosing to just this is self pity and wallowing and not productive anymore. So I think it's just important to keep that in mind that it will take as long as it needs to take, but we can choose to make it longer than it needs to be.
Mhm. Well, because also it's stuff starts coming up in terms of not only can you use it as a scapegoat. My gosh, we could go on for. I'm like looking at.
I
I'm like,
know.
oh my gosh, we could do part one,
Talk
part
about
two.
this for
Uh,
days.
I know. The part about, of it being, also that we get comfortable how do we it becomes
Yeah.
part of our identity and
Mhm.
then our self-pity for ourselves, but then
Mhm.
also others, the attention we may get from others
Mhm.
that know that we've gone through something that's hard
Oh, totally.
also becomes something we're gaining. So we might have lost something, but then if we are also enjoying the attention that may come from the fact that now we have this label of something. And again, I this doesn't happen in every case, but I do want to say that I think I used the victim card for a long time with my sister passed away. Like, like,
Mhm.
and and a lot of the excuses in my life of why I wasn't moving forward. And not there weren't excuses per se, but there were reasons of it. But
Mhm.
then it's like,
Mhm.
okay, now you know the why. Now do something about it. Now you
Yeah.
know why you don't know how to plan a 5-year plan, because of XYZ of people dying young around your life. You know what I mean? Whatever it
Mhm.
is, now do something about it. So that is another reason that sometimes people just kinda like to
Yeah.
live in their grief rather
Mhm.
than, like, with it, like,
Yeah.
kinda traveling in life with it. It's like I compare it to, like, having, like, this a bag, like, or a purse or backpack on you, but
Mhm.
when you were, like, living in it, it's like being stuck inside, like, a sleeping bag and intending to walk through life inside
Yeah.
that sleeping bag. Like,
Mhm.
you can't. That's not how you can carry it. You have to carry
Right.
it with you, and it becomes lighter as you go through life,
Yep.
or you become stronger, one or the other,
Probably
because you
both.
both, yeah,
Hopefully
so
both.
yeah,
Hopefully
hopefully
both.
this has
Yeah.
been so awesome. Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
laughed,
I'm
I
glad.
I
Yeah.
had a lot of aha moments. It's been great. Thank you so much, Dave, and thank
My
you to
pleasure.
Roz and the kiddos too
Yeah.
for allowing Daddy to have this switch his video game time, me time, to be a podcast
I know.
recording time. So I'm very grateful again for your time, Dave.
My pleasure. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. And if you want, do you have any page, or can I put anything in the notes for people that are in the area, or for when you have your, I don't know if your website's still in development for
Yeah.
your own business that's
No, it's
coming?
it's up. I need to redo it, but it's up and it gets kind of the point across. But it's grammarfamilytherapy.com.
Okay.
And I'm in, I'm licensed in California, so I can work with anybody in the state of California.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I'll make sure
And
that to
actually,
get the actual spelling that, so that I can put that
yeah,
on the show.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
Thank you again.
My
Okay.
pleasure. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.